Constable and the Police and Crime Commissioner, in terms of, obviously the Commissioner will set their police and crime plan, but there's got to be that honest conversation and trusting relationship between the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Chief Constable, so that there is some synergy between what the Commissioner wants in their police and crime police and crime plan, and what the Chief Constable is setting as the direction for the force. And I think in terms of my ability to form those effective working relationships between myself and a PCC, I've been able to demonstrate over the past 2 years. I recognise there will need to be those honest, open and sometimes challenging conversations to make sure that we can reach that position of compromise. But in my first answer, Councillor, I think I'm absolutely committed and recognising that me just having a poster and a form of words on a wall will not necessarily land with somebody at 2, 3 in the morning. I've got to make sure through numerous communication messages to make sure that what I am setting as the vision is meaningful and it's understood by all of our front line. And I don't just mean our police officers, I mean right across the organisation. It's a really old analogy, but it's the NASA analogy around understanding the cleaner who understood what their mission and purpose was about getting to the moon. And I think that's something I would be absolutely passionate about in terms of continuing the excellent work in driving that community first approach through Merseyside. I have to say it's really well embedded, it's really understood by the organisation and our communities, and people are really proud of it, which is why I wouldn't be seeking to throw it out, because I say it does, for me, it chimes with my values. So it would be really key to make sure that I communicate that at every level of the organisation. But you'll have heard in my first answer why I really want to empower our senior leaders to be able to deliver that message with their teams, because it will mean different things to different people. There'll be different parts of the strategy that are really important to them, as opposed to other parts of the strategy. So I think that's why it's important to allow and empower our senior leaders to do that with our teams.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Constable. It is difficult to convert the rhetoric to reality, but that was a very comprehensive answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. I don't have any indications of follow-up, so we can move to Councillor Jennings with question 3.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Constable. I will now refer you back to the community consultation question. We know it's very important to consult with the community very effectively. I'm just wondering if you could draw on a past experience to offer us an illustration of how you made sure that that was both representative and meaningful. Thank you.
Well, as I said in the first question, it's something that I'm really passionate about, and the reason, and I'll just take us forward facing before I answer the question. What I think in the past we've had a tendency to do in policing is when I first joined, I think we just told our communities what their priorities were, and over the years we've got a little bit better, and we tell and listen. So we listen to what communities tell us, and then we tell back what those priorities are. And we are, again, I think we're getting better further, and technology is assisting that. So we now, I think, are in a position where we tell, listen, and we involve our communities in being part of the solution. And we've got some brilliant examples across Merseyside where I think we've actually got proper, meaningful community engagement where we tell, listen, involve, and we empower our communities to actually design the solutions themselves. So I would relate to the work we did in Speak Up, and Litherland with Lift Up Litherland, where we really we were kind of the pebble that we threw into the pond and created the ripples, but we weren't actually the person that was telling the communities those what their solutions were. But just to pick up the point around the community consultation and the making sure it's consultative. One of the things that I did as Deputy Chief Constable was have a look at our model around our Merseyside Independent Advisory Group, and I'd had some experience from working elsewhere quite closely with independent advisory groups, and I felt we needed to really challenge ourselves as an organisation to make sure that group was more reflective of our communities, and also that we were using them as critical friends instead of just updating them about things that were ongoing. So I commissioned local policing through John Roy, one of my ACCs, to work with local policing to see how we could modernise and update and really challenge ourselves around the use of the MIAG. What the team have done is pull together a new terms of reference for that group. We have now got much better representation across our MIAG. It's much more reflective of our communities, but we are now using them as critical friends and to scrutinise the work that Merseyside Police is doing. So throughout COVID, they have played a key role in us updating them and bringing them into our gold meetings to give us that voice of the community and what their views are on some of the strategies and decisions that we're taking both internally and externally. We've now got scrutiny panels using those MIAG members, making sure that they've got the training to be able to do that, and then the confidence to hold us to account. We're doing that for stop search, section 60s and body worn video, but my ambition is that we need to broaden that out to a wider range of issues that communities recognise impact on trust and confidence in our communities. So that's something I will be absolutely driving as Chief Constable. And the reason that it's so important is because of that legitimacy. And as we've seen over the last 12 months, our legitimacy with our communities has been impacted. So it's important that we continue to grow and strengthen that relationship. And the other key bit about it for me is, whilst our MIAG is much more representative than it was and reflective of our communities, it's still a small number. So a key thing that I will be wanting local policing to develop is how do we actually communicate out more broadly that work that we do to finish that feedback loop. So those MIAG members, they come in, they're our critical friends, they scrutinise our work. They themselves will communicate back out to their organisations, but I think the next step is to broaden it out more widely.
So very positive and forward-looking. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I said thank you. It's a very positive answer and very forward-looking. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Mr. Pickup, question 4.
Deputy Chief, could you give an example of how you have used the organisation's values to inspire colleagues in your day-to-day activities?
So we have a set of principles, the just principles, which so I'll start again. The College of Policing set out what the code of ethics were for policing. It was 9 words. They were all values, but by most people, by the time they get to value kind of 6 or 7, I've run out of steam and can't remember them all. So the organisation, and I have to, I can't take credit for this, it is my predecessors, but we've got a really clear set of just principles around just think, just lead, just listen, and just hear. And they are really well resonated within the organisation. But when I was developing, working with the Chief Constable, the force strategy moving forward for 2020 to 2025, the key bit was around, are those values still fit for purpose? Do they land with the organisation as well as we think they do? Are they meaningful? So to ensure and to kind of get the sentiment of the organisation and benchmark, I set a series of focus groups on a cross section of the organisation. So it wasn't so it was a cross section, right across all departments, all ranks, grades, police staff, police officers, and asked them around the force strategy in its current format, which was 2018 to 2020, but also what it meant to them, how they believed in it, and how it related to our communities. Luckily, the just principles were still really embedded within the organisation. But how I've used that in a practical way is that one of the key things we've introduced for the 2020 to 25 strategy is our people strategy, really focusing in on some key elements of our people. So well-being, for example, being a real priority, but also leadership. And the College of Policing have a competency value framework, which every officer and member of the organisation should follow in terms of if they're applying for a new job. It should be our Bible of how we operate. But as a force, we felt it was a bit tick boxy. It was about doing things as opposed to behaviours. And if we were a really value-based organisation, which we pride ourselves on, we felt we wanted leadership principles that were based on behaviours. So the leadership team working within our academy have developed a new leadership strategy, and it's absolutely based back to our just principles, which are around our values and are around our behaviours. So it includes things like, compassion, caring, inclusivity. So I think some of the key challenges that we will face in policing over the next 12 months, 5 years, coming on the back of COVID in relation to well-being of our staff and inclusivity of our staff, will be much richer and enhanced by the link between the just principles and the leadership strategy.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Can I just follow up on that one? It may seem a contradiction in a sense. When I was a magistrate, quite often the law said and the procedures required us to apply the law and act in set ways. Common sense, experience and circumstances would often say there should be another way of doing it. And clearly, quite often, when you have established goals and established aims, etc., things get in the way, and COVID being the best example, I think, at the present time, where the law says one thing, but conflicting with aims and so on in terms of community cohesion and confidence. And so there can be a conflict there.
Yeah, absolutely. There has been that conflict. I think whilst the legislation came in and it changed, obviously changed quite frequently, I'd like to think in the main, Merseyside Police, we got it right. So for the first 9 months and for the first lockdown, and then when we were into the tier restrictions, we very much took an approach around using the 3 E's. So the encourage, the engage, the explain, recognising that policing through COVID was bringing us into contact with members of our community who we would never have come across from an enforcement perspective. So they probably only would have come into contact with us at a point of crisis, i.e. when they rang 999 and needed our help. So we were really aware of the impact on our legitimacy and that trust and confidence with our communities, which is why we took that approach around the 3 E's. But if there was a blatant disregard for the legislation, we would then enforce. And when you look at kind of where we were in terms of the number of tickets we were issuing, we were about middle of the road where you would expect a force the size of Merseyside Police to be in terms of the number of tickets that we issued. So it felt proportionate, it felt the right thing to do. On the majority of occasions, we got it right. The feedback from our communities was positive from that engagement. As we've moved into this lockdown now, we've taken the view, everybody knows the rules. Our NHS was absolutely falling over. People were really, people were dying unnecessarily because of breaches of COVID rules. So we've taken a much stronger, firmer stance around enforcement, which and we have issued a lot more tickets during this last quarter. So whilst the legislation was there, it absolutely, I think, needed to be down to each area to have the flexibility, which is difficult within the legislation, to do the right thing for your communities. So what you didn't see in Merseyside was overzealous policing of shopping baskets, but we sort of supported our supermarkets in terms of those queues outside, those awful queues in lockdown 1 outside of supermarkets. You didn't see the use of drones for people visiting beauty spots. But when we got it wrong, and we have got it wrong, we've held our hands up and said sorry, because we recognise we've not got it right all the time. But the other important thing with that is to support the staff as well when they've got it wrong, because they've, you know, it's been challenging for them in terms of social media and the coverage around them when they've got it wrong. So we've held our hands up to our communities and said, you know, we got this wrong and we are sorry, and we've rescinded the tickets. We've also made sure that our staff were looked after when those situations happened.
Thank you, Deputy Chief.
Thank you, Keith. Appreciate that. Question 5, Councillor Rowlands.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Deputy Chief Constable. Can I first thank you for your precise, clear answers, because that's really refreshing this morning.
Thank you.
How would you manage a fundamental disagreement between yourself and the Commissioner on a strategic matter? And how would you manage a fundamental disagreement between yourself and the Commissioner on an operational matter?
Well, I'll take the strategic one first. So I think it's around the importance is building that trust and confidence and having an open and honest relationship with the Police and Crime Commissioner right from the off, because clearly if my appointment is approved today, I'm going to find myself in a position in the next couple of months where I will be working with a new Police and Crime Commissioner. So I think it's around we're going to have to build that relationship, understand each other's priorities, but also understand our different roles, because clearly the roles are very different. So if there is a major disagreement and it is something where the PCC is within their right to hold me to account over it, that's when we're going to have the open, honest conversation. How can we reach compromise on this? How can we meet the middle ground? What's non-negotiable for the PCC? What's non-negotiable for me in terms of my role? I think on an operational matter, that's where we need to get those ground rules understood early, in terms of it's my responsibility around operational delivery, and I make decisions based on the operational delivery of the force, and the PCC, whilst can express a view and often has done, and can provide wise counsel. Ultimately, as Chief Constable, it's my decision around the operational delivery of the force. But I think if you've not built that relationship with your Police and Crime Commissioner, that will be very difficult and very challenging. And I think it goes back to the point I raised earlier around the synergy between the Police and Crime plan and the Chief Constable's plan. And whilst they're not going to be mirror images of each other, if you've built that relationship and you've got those synergy, and you understand, in terms of what the Police and Crime Commissioner wants the force to deliver on behalf of the communities, and then how I interpret that into my vision and clarity, I think it will set a good relationship and a good position. But I'm not naive enough to know that there won't be challenges along the way, as there have been whilst I've been both ACC and deputy, when we have been moving change forward.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Constable. That was exactly the answers I wanted to hear.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowlands. Councillor Aston, question 6.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, Deputy Chief. Given the independence required of this role, what example can you give the panel today that illustrates how you've been personally accountable for the delivery of a particular policy or strategy?
Sorry, in relation to where I've had to work with the police and the PCC?
No, in general, just in your, the roles that you've had within Merseyside Police or others, where have you been able to, can you illustrate where you've personally been accountable for delivering a particular policy or strategy?
So the example I'll use for this is around domestic abuse. So when and a policy that we've introduced as a result of national changes. So it might get a bit technical, so please bear with me. So I'm sure you will recall that policing used to have to do satisfaction surveys, and we used to have to contact a number of victims in certain crime categories, and the government, and that was called an annual data requirement. The government got rid of that annual data requirement in 2018, I think it was, but what they introduced in 2017 was a requirement to survey victims of domestic abuse in a similar way to that we had done in relation to the crime types, which were vehicle crime, burglary and violence. When I arrived, that should have been in place for 2017. But it wasn't in place. Unfortunately, the Home Office recognised how challenging surveying victims of domestic abuse can be in terms of managing their safety. So it's not as simple as ringing other victims of crime. So the Home Office allowed forces another 12 months to develop that, to develop their strategy about how they were going to do that. I saw this as a real opportunity for the organisation. Whilst we were getting rid of the annual data requirement for satisfaction, my view was absolutely, and I suppose it links back to those earlier questions around, we absolutely want to understand from our victims of crime how it feels to be a victim of crime, and actually broaden out how it feels to, when you report an incident to Merseyside Police, how was it for you? How can we learn from it, and how can we improve? So I commissioned some work to look at where the best practice was, what the evidence base was, assuming there would be some out there and hoping we could borrow with pride. There was actually very, very little good practice out, other than kind of the very traditional satisfaction surveys. So because of the imperative around domestic abuse, I focused on domestic abuse first. And we were able to work with another force to do telephone surveying of victims of domestic abuse safely. But I wanted to, that was, for me, that's quite, in terms of a telephone call remotely, I wanted to make sure that we got some real qualitative data from our victims of domestic abuse. So I worked with the OPCC and their community engagement team, and also each of the local authorities to get feedback using focus groups from victims of domestic abuse. So we set up, so there was 5 focus groups in each of the local authority areas. Then there was a focus which were female based because we couldn't mix the genders. Then we had a focus group for male victims of domestic abuse. So they were run by the local authorities with the OPCC, with the support of adverts to make sure the domestic abuse victims felt comfortable. And we also then got feedback, and we worked with the adverts to develop the questions again, because it's all very well us as policing writing a set of questions, and whilst we will have victims of domestic abuse in the organisation, it felt right that we actually involved the adverts in writing those questions. We also then got feedback from the adverts. So whilst and we had to overcome some challenges there, because the adverts were saying, well, we're independent, we don't want to be seen as part of the policing. So we had to have quite a lot of meetings around that to make sure that the adverts felt comfortable in sharing generic qualitative feedback about the service we supplied to victims of domestic abuse. But what we reached was a position where we were getting feedback from victims using telephone surveys, qualitative through face-to-face focus groups delivered through the OPCC, and then the more generic I suppose headlines from adverts to give us a really rich picture and enable us to change the way in which we the way in which we deliver our services to domestic abuse victims. and some of the things that, you know, really interesting. So one of the things that the HMIC examine us on is they scrutinise us around if we deal with a domestic abuse victim and we don't take the offender through to court. That is called outcome 16. And HMIC sometimes say, well, too many outcome 16s is bad. You're not taking enough people to court. On the flip side, the feedback that we got from our victims is they felt listened to. If they did not want to go through the criminal justice system, they felt supported and listened to by Merseyside police, and they didn't feel re-victimised. So it's a real dilemma in terms of HMIC wanting one thing, but actually we pride ourselves on putting the victims at the heart of everything we do through Community First. So we have listened to our victims and made sure that our service is victim enabled. I mentioned the other broader satisfaction work that we did. There was no best practice out there. We worked with the Open University to pilot a system of how we could better engage with people who contact the organisation, and we've now got a system, we call it getting user insight, and we get that user insight now from a much broader range than just vehicle crime, burglary and violence, so through incident data as well. So if people just ring up to have contact with us, and we've closed that feedback loop, because officers now using our system called Delphi, which is an IT system that they use to kind of manage their jobs on a day-to-day basis, see how many jobs they've got, how many crimes they've got. The feedback goes directly to them if it's good feedback, so it will pop up and they will get some nice feedback from a member of the community if they've done something well. If there's some developmental feedback, it goes to their line manager. So rather than it appearing on an officer's screen and perhaps having a negative reaction immediately, it goes to their line manager, so their line manager can do some developmental work with them. So we've really closed that loop. Member of the public reports something, we contact them and encourage that feedback, and then we go back to the officer. So you've got that learning cycle.
Sorry, Jane, I think you're on mute there.
Yeah, I was on mute. Apologies, Chair. Thank you for that. And thank you, Deputy Chief. Thanks.
It's the phrase of COVID, isn't it? You're on mute.
I saw it on a poster, the quote of the year. One final question then, Deputy Chief Constable, and this is actually coming from myself. So obviously the role means a considerable amount of personal responsibility, not least of which because, as I know from my previous job, when actions are brought against the police, they're brought against the Chief Constable in person. So how would you take personal responsibility, first of all, for successes, and then crucially for failures? And could you provide an example for each of when this has happened? Thank you.
I'll take the nice bit first. I'll take the successes first. I think the really important bit around a leader is recognising that the successes are not down to you as the Chief Constable. You need to celebrate the success with your team, and make sure that reward and recognition is given to those people that are operating on behalf of the force, operating on behalf of the communities. So that would be a key bit, that I wasn't seen as someone who was absolutely taking the accolades when the positive praise comes in to the organisation. I would I suppose it's something that I would be, as a team player, one of the best things about being in the police is being part of a team, and being at the head of that team for me is around encouraging and supporting and rewarding and recognising members of those teams. So when there is positive praise and things have gone well, I suppose I'm trying to think of an example, but I suppose it's the even down to something simple like the media coverage. When something's gone well, make sure you enable and allow the person who's done that piece of work to do the reporting, be quoted in the media, do the interviews, because it's them that deserves the reward and recognition and the reflection. you know, that's the time to stand back as the chief and as a leader, and really encourage and allow those people to flourish, because they will, you know, carry on and do more of that work. But the flip is also true when things have gone wrong, and that is absolutely when it's your time as a leader, and certainly as the chief constable, to step up and be willing to have your name, and you know, do the media reporting, have your name against that, do the interviews, because your staff are looking for that. They are going to be feeling, you know, vulnerable enough as it is. There's been numerous examples. If you keep with the media, where I've had to do that recently. We had the lady at the beach at Formby, who travelled from Knowsley to take her daughter for exercise. That was one of the COVID examples where we got it wrong. I was on cover that weekend. The media release came to me, and it was using the inspector who was running Operation Georgia that weekend, which is our operation for COVID. And you know, the inspector was going, yeah, I'll take this, put my name next to it, and I absolutely went back and said, no, I will take this. I'm gold cover. We've got it wrong. It will be me. You know, Phoenix Gym was the same. It was the same weekend. I was on cover again that same weekend, and it was myself who went out and did the media, even though and what's quite nice is that sense of team. So even though I've got the local policing superintendent at Liverpool saying, no, I'll go and do the media, that is the time to step up and say, no, I will do the media here, because we're coming up in for a lot of stick from members of our community. The two examples there, I think, you know, we got it wrong at the beach. We absolutely got it right with Phoenix Gym. But we were getting a lot of stick, and it was my responsibility as the gold commander that week to go and do the media, clear my diary, and make sure that I prioritise that over the other things that I was doing. And hopefully that sends a really strong message to the organisation around the support they will get. You know, what I'd be looking for is encouraging that. It's a bit of a trendy phrase at the moment, but that fail fast. So if you try something, it goes wrong, well done for trying it, we'll move on. If you've done something with the best of intentions, you'll have the support of the organisation. If you tell us about it, if you're dishonest, you've hidden it, it's a different, you know, that's a different story. And I think stepping up to Chief Constable, that is absolutely my role. Let the staff be rewarded for their successes and take the praise, but step up to the mark when things have gone wrong.
Well, thank you very much, Deputy Chief Constable. I don't have any follow-ups to that, and I'm not aware of any indications from members. What I'd ask now then is, Deputy Chief, if you are happy to leave the meeting, for members of the public viewing, just to reiterate, what will happen now is the panel will take a short recess. However, I need to do the legally correct thing. I will move exclusion of the public and to private session if I have a seconder.
Seconded.
Second that, Chair.
I also
Thank you,
support that, Chair.
Councillor Aston, Sayers, Jennings and Shaw. Thank you very much. That's a good cross section there as well. So the panel will take a short recess whilst we go into private session. We will then discuss the Commissioner's nomination of Deputy Chief Constable Kennedy, and then our formal appraisal will be provided shortly, if that's okay. Deputy Chief, I'd like to thank you for taking this morning to meet with us, and we will be in touch very shortly. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Grateful.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Thank you. Colleagues, as discussed, we will take a short break now. If people mute themselves, turn off their cameras, and then if KMBC staff can take us into private session, that'd be great. Thank you. If we can come back at 5 to.